I was sitting on a cold concrete floor, back against a metal wall, eating lukewarm soup straight from the can when my old life finally caught up with me. The spoon rattled against the tin every time my hand shook, which was often. Above me, a single bare bulb flickered, buzzing like it was tired of trying. I was living in a 5x10 storage unit off the highway, sharing a row of numbered doors with people's forgotten furniture and seasonal decorations. Mine was Unit 32B, 10 feet long, 5 feet wide, just enough space for a cot, a lantern, and 2 boxes of clothes that still smelled faintly like fabric softener, and a life I no longer had. 6 months earlier, if you'd driven past my house, you would have said I was doing great. From the outside, my life looked like one of those glossy postcard families. My name is Emily Hartman. I was 37, married to Ethan, everyone's favorite nice guy project manager, mother to 2 kids I would have walked through fire for. Liam, 14, lanky, and always carrying a football. Sophie, 10, with a messy ponytail, glitter on everything, and a stuffed bunny that went everywhere she did. We lived in a cozy 2-story house in Riverbend, Oregon, with blue shutters and a white porch swing Ethan had built himself one summer weekend while the kids ran through sprinklers, and I brought out lemonade. I loved that swing. I used to sit there late at night after everyone was asleep, listening to the crickets and thinking, this is it. This is what I worked for. I had a job I was proud of too. I was a senior designer at Riverbend Architecture, a firm I'd helped grow from a tiny shop above a bakery into one of the most respected names in town. Long nights, tight deadlines, thousands of tiny decisions that no one outside the industry would ever notice, but it mattered to me. It felt like I was building something real, not just for clients, but for my kids' future. Ironically, and I wish I had paid more attention to how ironic it was back then, my younger sister, K.H. Lowe, worked at the same firm. She came in a few years after me, all confidence and bright lipstick, the fun one. Where I was steady and detail-obsessed, K.H. Lowe was charming and loud, the person who could make a room laugh within minutes. People loved her. They'd say things like, "You two are so lucky, sisters working together." And I believed that. I believed we were a team, sisters against the world. There were little moments, even then, that should have made me pause. Times when K.H. Lowe would joke about how I got all the responsibility and she got all the fun. Times she'd roll her eyes when I had to leave early for one of Liam's games or Sophie's school play. Once, at a company happy hour, she leaned over with that conspiratorial tone and said, "You work too hard, Em. You're married to that firm." Ethan, standing beside us, laughed and said, "Hey, I thought she was married to me." But there was an edge in his voice I later realized I'd ignored. I didn't see the cracks while I was living inside them. I thought being tired all the time was just being a working mom. I thought Ethan's occasional distance was just stress. I thought K.H. Lowe's little digs were just sibling teasing. When people asked how I was, I'd say, busy, but good, and I meant it. Then came that Thursday. It was late afternoon. The office sunk in that quiet lull between coffee and going home time. I was reviewing a set of plans when an email popped into my inbox with the subject line, "You deserve to know." No sender name I recognized, no message body, just a single attachment. My first thought was spam. My second was okay, curiosity wins. I clicked the attachment, and a photo filled my screen. Ethan and KH Lowe. In the parking lot behind our office, kissing. The world narrowed to a tunnel. My stomach flipped so fast, I thought I might throw up right there at my desk. My brain tried to protect me with denial. This is edited. Someone is messing with you. But then I recognized the dented blue dumpster in the background, the crack in the asphalt near the rear door, the faint outline of our firm's logo on the building. It was our parking lot, our office. Their mouths were too close for it to be anything but what it was. My hands went cold. I zoomed in, like maybe if I saw their faces more clearly, the truth would change. It didn't. Ethan's hand was on her waist, fingers digging in like he'd done with me 1,000 times. KH Lowe's eyes were closed, her hand on his chest, her body angled into his. I left my desk without really deciding to. My legs carried me down the hallway past people who probably said goodbye, but sounded like static. By the time I got to my car, my chest felt like it was filled with shattered glass. I drove home on autopilot, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. When I walked into the kitchen, Ethan was standing at the counter scrolling through his phone like it was any other day. The smell of tomato sauce hung in the air. The sink was half full of dishes, the way it always was by 6 p.m. Ethan, I whispered, my throat tight, holding out my phone with the photo on the screen. What is this? He glanced at it. Just glanced. Then he sighed, set his own phone down, and rubbed his temples like I was giving him a headache. Emily, he said, voice low and annoyingly calm. Don't make a scene. A scene, I repeated, my voice cracking. That's my sister, he shrugged, avoiding my eyes. You were always so busy, so distant. KH Lowe understands me. The words felt like someone was rewiring my memories in real time. Family dinners, vacations, Ethan and KH Lowe sharing jokes at the table, it all flipped and twisted. This wasn't supposed to happen, he added, as if that made it noble. But it did. I stood there barefoot on the tile, the smell of burnt garlic in the air, feeling my life tilt sideways. I wanted him to say it was a mistake, that he was drunk, that it happened once and he regretted it. He didn't. He just looked annoyed, like this confrontation was an inconvenience he hadn't scheduled. When KH Lowe walked into the office the next day, she didn't slink in shame like I guess I'd imagined. He showed up with a fresh haircut, new heels, and a hand casually resting on Ethan's arm as they came through the glass doors together. Our coworkers glanced up, then down, the way people do when they've heard something but don't know if they're allowed to acknowledge it. KH Lowe caught my eye across the room and smiled, a small, almost pitying smile. By Monday, my boss called me into his office. His face was soft, sympathetic, the way people look when they've already made a decision and just want you to accept it. We've decided to go in a different direction, he said. KH Lowe will be taking over your role. Different direction. It wasn't a reorg, it was exile. Within weeks, Ethan filed for divorce. He used every ugly word he could find: unstable, neglectful, obsessed with work. He painted himself as the victim, the lonely husband abandoned by his career-focused wife, and KH Lowe as the supportive new partner who cared about family first. He got the house. He got primary custody. He got my kids' day-to-day life while I got tightly scheduled visits and a stack of court orders. The day the judge signed the papers, it was raining. Of course it was. I stood outside the courthouse holding an umbrella that wouldn't open, watching other people hurry past, their lives intact. My phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. "You'll die poor and alone. KH Lowe's already a better mother to our kids than you ever were." Something inside me broke then, not loudly, not dramatically. It was a quiet, complete shattering, like dropping a glass in the sink and watching it dissolve into dust instead of shards. I didn't know it yet, sitting there soaked in rain and humiliation. But that was the day my old life ended, and the day my real story began. After that text, I stopped feeling like a person, and more like a ghost haunting my own life. I drive past our old house sometimes, not on purpose at first, just muscle memory, and see the porch light on, curtains drawn, silhouettes moving. My silhouettes, except they weren't mine anymore. Ethan and KH Lowe moved into the house like they were taking over a lease instead of stealing a life. My porch swing stayed, but I wasn't on it. Liam's football photos started popping up on social media again, his arm around Ethan at the edge of the field, both of them grinning. Sophie's pictures surfaced too, but she looked smaller somehow, folded into herself in a way that made my chest ache. When I called to talk to them, it was KH Lowe who answered most of the time. "They're fine, Emily," she'd say with that fake calmness, like she was the reasonable one. "Maybe it's better if you give them space." Space from their own mother, I'd ask. Silence. Then some line about routine, stability, and what's best for the kids. Meanwhile, my savings evaporated. Lawyer fees, rent, groceries, gas. It all drained faster than I could keep up. Then I got the letter from my job. Severance adjusted due to misconduct. According to HR, I'd accessed private company files without authorization. Files I had never touched. Files that someone with my login and my proximity could have easily made it look like I had. Chloe had made sure of that. I remember standing in the grocery store that day with a carton of milk in my hand, doing the math in my head, realizing that if I swiped my card, it would decline. People moved around me with carts full of food and normal married people conversations about dinners and lunches, and which brand of cereal the kids liked now. The lights started to feel too bright. The floor felt like it was tilting. I put the milk back. I walked out empty-handed. By the end of the month, my landlord slid a final notice under my door. I tried to negotiate, tried to buy time. But you can't explain. My sister helped my husband steal my entire life on a rental application and expect sympathy. I packed what I could into my car, some clothes, a few photos, the kids' drawings I couldn't bear to leave behind, and slept in the backseat behind a closed diner on the edge of town. The first morning the owner caught me in his parking lot. He tapped on my window gently. I jolted awake, heart pounding. He didn't yell. He didn't call the cops. He just looked at the mess of my things in the car, at my rumpled clothes, at the way I tried to smooth my hair in the rearview mirror, and said quietly, "There's a place down by the highway. Storage units. Quiet, cheap. Might be safer than sleeping out here." That's how I ended up in Unit 32B. It smelled like metal, dust, and old cigarette smoke. The concrete floor radiated cold at night, seeping into my bones no matter how many blankets I layered. I bought a cheap camping cot, a little lantern, and a used camping stove. I borrowed Wi-Fi from the gas station across the street, sitting in my car with my phone balanced on the steering wheel, pretending everything was normal to anyone who texted. Each night, I fell asleep to the sound of rain tapping on the thin metal roof, whispering that this was all I'd ever be now, a woman forgotten by her own family, tucked away between someone's old couch and another person's boxes of Christmas decorations. I sold my wedding ring for $40 at a pawn shop that smelled like metal and disappointment. The guy behind the counter didn't ask why my hands were shaking. Half of that money went into my gas tank, and the other half I hoarded like it might multiply if I stared at it hard enough. One particularly bad night, I came back to the unit with a small bag of groceries, bread, cheap soup, instant coffee, and my flashlight beam skimmed across something behind a broken chair the previous renter had left behind. A flash of brown leather, not like the usual plastic bins that people shoved in there. I moved the chair aside and found an old briefcase, dust-coated, handle cracked heavy. There was a luggage tag on it, yellowed and worn. I wiped it with my thumb and froze. Emily J. Hartman, my name, middle initial, and everything. I frowned so hard my forehead hurt. I had never owned a briefcase like that. I wasn't the leather briefcase type. I was the massive tote bag with snacks and stray crayons type. The lock was one of those old 3-digit wheel combinations. I tried the obvious: 101 for my birthday, 314 for our anniversary, 911 because part of me felt dramatic. Nothing. The numbers clicked and clicked, but the latch stayed firm. I set it aside and tried to sleep, but my brain wouldn't shut up. How long had it been there? Who put it there? Why did it have my name? The wind whistled through the tiny gaps in the metal door. The lantern cast shaky shadows on the walls. Sometime around 2 a.m., when my thoughts had looped the same useless questions 100 times, I sat up, grabbed the screwdriver from my little toolbox, and whispered into the dark, "You took everything, Ethan. Maybe not this." I wedged the screwdriver into the edge of the lock and twisted. Hard, the metal resisted, then gave with a sharp snap. The latch popped open with a sound that felt way too loud in that tiny space. I held my breath. Nothing happened, obviously. No explosion, no alarms. Just my own pulse thudding in my ears. I flipped the briefcase open. Stacks of crisp $100 bills stared back at me, bound in neat paper bands that still smelled faintly like the bank. On top of them, laid out as precisely as blueprints on a drafting table, was a yellowed note. For a second, my fingers just hovered. Money like that didn't belong in my world anymore. I was the woman counting quarters for gas, not the woman opening suitcases full of cash like in movies. My hands were shaking so hard the paper almost tore when I picked it up. The handwriting leaned sharply to the right, messy but familiar in a way that hit me in the chest. "Emily, if you're reading this, you've lost everything." Good. Only when the lies are stripped away can you see the truth. The money inside this case is travel money. The real fortune and the truth about your father's death waits at these coordinates in Montana. Beneath that, in fading ink, was a signature I hadn't seen in over a decade. Uncle Raymond. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Uncle Raymond had been my dad's older brother, a Vietnam vet who came back half-broken, paranoid, intense, saying things that made adults exchange worried glances. When I was little, he'd show up at Thanksgiving, sit at the end of the table, and mutter about wolves in suits and how Dad needed to watch his back. After my father died, In what everyone called a sawmill accident, Raymond disappeared into the mountains. The adults said he'd gone crazy. As I sat there in that cold storage unit, notes shaking in my hands, I wondered if he'd been the only one seeing clearly. At the bottom of the letter, coordinates were scribbled: 47, 0916 degrees N, 113, 9,948 degrees W. Underneath, 2 words: Timberwolf Trail. I let out a bitter laugh that sounded more like a sob. Sure, Uncle Raymond. Just a casual trip to the middle of nowhere, I muttered. But the line about my father's death grabbed me by the throat. My dad's accident had never fully made sense to me. Officially, he'd been crushed by a malfunctioning loader at the mill. Everyone said it was tragic, but accidents happen. Whenever I asked questions growing up, why wasn't anyone else hurt? Why were there no warnings beforehand? My mom would go pale and whisper, "Let the dead rest, Emily." Now I wondered if she'd been scared, not superstitious. I counted the money. $49,000 in clean, fresh bills, each bundle stamped from a local bank. Not drug money, not random, organized, intentional. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't a prank. It was a door. All night, I paced the narrow strip of concrete, clutching the note like it was the only solid thing in my life. Travel money, real fortune, truth about my father. What did he mean by fortune? Did Raymond strike it rich in the mountains? Had he lost his mind and buried boxes of rock somewhere? Or was fortune his word for something else? Evidence, land, secrets. When the first gray light of dawn crept under the door, I'd made my decision. I sold the last of my jewelry. I bought a beat-up Ford Escape from a guy who didn't ask why I was paying in cash and avoiding eye contact. I packed a duffel with clothes, a flashlight, a road map, some basic supplies, and that briefcase, which I sealed in a plastic bag and slid under the passenger seat. Before I pulled out of the storage lot, I looked back at Unit 32 be my concrete cocoon, my rock bottom. "Goodbye," I whispered. "Thanks for the message." Then I turned the key, pressed the gas, and drove toward the only thing that made any kind of sense anymore: the truth. The drive from Oregon to Montana felt less like a road trip and more like shedding skin. Every mile marker was a little funeral for the life I'd lost. A goodbye to the house with blue shutters, to Liam's football games I watched from the bleachers, to Sophie's sleepy "good night, Mommy," whispered into my neck. I kept the radio low, mostly for noise. Gas station coffee became my breakfast. Cheap motels with floral bedspreads became nightly reminders that I was in between lives. I'd flop onto the bed, stare at the popcorn ceiling, and try not to think about the fact that my children were going to sleep in a house I no longer had a key to, with a woman who wore my last name like a trophy. By the third day, the air changed. It grew thinner, colder, sharper, like even the atmosphere was less forgiving out there. Snow capped the distant mountains. Pines lined the roads, dark and dense. My GPS signal started to flicker, then vanished completely just outside Flathead County. The screen read, "No service." It felt on the nose like the universe was saying, "You're on your own from here." I pulled over, unfolded the crumpled road map I'd bought just in case I got old school lost, and traced the coordinates with my finger. Timberwolf Trail. There it was, labeled in tiny letters like any other back road, even though it felt like a portal. The turnoff wasn't marked. The road was more of a scar through the trees, uneven, narrow, half hidden by brush. I eased the Ford onto it, tires crunching over frozen dirt and bits of rock. Branches scraped the sides of the car. My heart kept a steady drumbeat. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? After what felt like forever, but was probably half a mile, I saw it. A rusted red gate, hanging crooked on its hinges. A faded private property sign swung in the wind, squeaking. I got out, breath puffing white in the cold air, and fumbled with the key that had been taped to the bottom of the briefcase. It slid into the padlock like it had been waiting. The lock clicked open. The gate groaned when I pushed it, metal complaining in a way that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Beyond the gate, the forest pressed in, muffling sound. No cars, no birds, just the soft shush of snow falling from overloaded branches. I followed the path on foot, boots crunching through thin crusts of snow. The trees crowded close, and for a moment I wondered if I was walking into some elaborate hallucination. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe my brain had invented this whole thing to protect me from the reality that I'd lost everything. Then I saw it. First, the boulder, massive, jagged, gray, shaped uncannily like a bear's head tilted toward the sky. Just like the note had said. Behind it, half buried in snow but very real, was a cabin. Not a rundown shack like I'd imagined a paranoid veteran would inhabit, but a solid, modern structure. Metal shutters, solar panels on the roof, a generator humming quietly like a heartbeat beneath the stillness. I stood there for a long moment, just staring, my pulse roaring in my ears. "Uncle Raymond," I whispered. "What the hell were you doing out here?" The cabin steps creaked under my weight as I climbed them. The doorknob was ice cold against my palm. I hesitated, then turned it. The door swung open easily, like the place had been expecting me. The air inside was sharp and dry, smelling faintly of dust, oil, and something else, paper gone old. I fumbled for a light switch out of habit, found one near the door, and flipped it. Nothing. The generator hummed, but the light stayed dark. Fine. I pulled out my flashlight. The beam landed on the far wall, and my breath caught. Photographs. Newspaper clippings. Handwritten notes. Entire walls covered in overlapping papers connected by red yarn, like the conspiracy boards people make fun of on TV. Except this wasn't funny. It was meticulous. Obsessive. Front and center was a photo of my father, James Hartman, shaking hands with another man outside a sawmill. My father's smile was familiar and painful. The other man, I recognized him from countless local news stories, charity galas, and unfortunately, my own past. Richard Caldwell, founder of Caldwell Industries, Ethan's father. Underneath the picture, in Uncle Raymond's messy scrawl, were the words, "Partnership Agreement, 1987. James Hartman and Richard Caldwell." I moved the flashlight along the red string leading away from that photo to a folder pinned beneath it. On the folder flap, "They killed him for the rights." My heart slammed against my ribs. I opened it with numb fingers. Inside were copies of police reports, sawmill maintenance logs, insurance documents. Raymond had circled dates, underlined phrases, scribbled comments in the margins. Loader serviced 24 hours before accident. Safety system overridden, not malfunctioning. Insurance policy amount increased by Caldwell SR. 3 months prior. James refused to sell mineral rights beneath mill. Mineral rights. I remembered my dad coming home once, sawdust in his hair, telling my mom, They want the land, not the mill. My mom's face had gone tight. She'd changed the subject. I'd been too young to understand. "Oh my God, Dad," I whispered, my voice echoing softly in the cabin. Across the room, another section of the wall was labeled, "C. Hartman." My stomach lurched. I crossed the room, each step feeling heavier than the last. There were photos of K.H. Lowe at different ages. 17, standing outside a cafe with Richard Caldwell's arm around her shoulders like a proud uncle. 20, signing what looked like a check from Caldwell Enterprises. 25, walking into a building that wasn't our firm. Each image had dates and notes scribbled next to them, payments, meetings, grooming. Pinned between the photos was an old digital voice recorder, the cheap kind you buy at office supply stores. A piece of tape on the back read, "Riverside Motel, 2011. My thumb hovered over the play button for a second. Then I pressed it. Static crackled, followed by voices. K.H. Lowe's voice, younger but unmistakable. "She trusts me completely. Ethan's falling for me already." Another voice, male, older, smooth as oil. I recognized it from televised interviews and community events. "Richard Caldwell. Good. Once she's out of the picture, Ethan inherits through the marriage. And we own the mineral rights through the kids. Keep her compliant." The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the desk to stay upright. K.H. Lowe hadn't just fallen in love with my husband. She hadn't even just betrayed me. She'd been working with Ethan's father, our family's enemy, apparently for years. My sister had been a project, an investment, a weapon. I stumbled to the desk, my eyes blurring. There, in the middle of the chaos, was a sealed envelope labeled, "Final instructions for Emily only." My fingers shook as I tore it open. Inside was a legal document, Uncle Raymond's will, and a separate sheet of paper. The will named me as his sole heir. Land, accounts, and something else. Ownership of the Hartman mineral rights. Estimated value, over $80 million. $80, million dollars. I sat down hard in the wooden chair, the edges digging into my thighs. 80 million wasn't just money. It was an explanation, a motive, a reason for why my father died, why Richard Caldwell had hovered around our family, why my marriage, my career, my kids had suddenly become a chessboard. Raymond's note was short. "Emily, if you're reading this, you've lost everything. I'm sorry it had to hurt this much. I couldn't save your father, but I can give you the chance to save yourself. The wolves who killed him and built their empire on his grave thought you'd never find this. This cabin is your inheritance. So are the rights, and these records. Use them wisely. When the lies are stripped away, you'll see who the wolves really are. Your choice will define everything." Raymond, I looked up at the walls again. The payments to judges, the offshore accounts, the emails between Ethan and K.H. Lowe dated months before our marriage started to crack. This wasn't just about an affair or a bad divorce. This was 4 decades of blood and greed. Suddenly, all the times people called me naive or too trusting felt less like insults and more like a setup. They needed me to stay in the dark, to believe family was sacred, to believe love meant loyalty, no matter what. In the silence of that cabin, generator humming softly, snow pressing against the windows, I realized something simple and brutal. My husband, my sister, and Ethan's family hadn't just stolen my life. They'd been building their empire on my father's grave and planning to use my children as the final lock on their fortune. And my uncle, broken, paranoid, half forgotten, was the only one who'd trusted me enough to leave me the truth. For a long time, I didn't move. I just sat there at Raymond's desk, staring at the USB drive taped inside the envelope, feeling its weight in my palm like it was a live grenade. It was small, plastic, quiet, but it held everything: bank records, recordings, accounts, paths of money slithering through shell companies and offshore accounts. On a separate slip of paper, Raymond's writing continued. You can take the money and vanish. Start over. No one would blame you. Or you can finish what I started. But understand, the truth will cost you peace before it sets you free. I thought about vanishing. I really did. I imagined changing my name, buying a little house in some town no one had heard of, cutting my hair, learning to bake bread, pretending I had never heard the name Caldwell in my life. I imagined letting Ethan and K.H. Lowe rot in their own lies, never confronting them, never stepping into a courtroom, never hearing my pain turned into cross-examination questions. It was tempting. But then I pictured Liam at 5 years old, tugging my sleeve as I tucked him in one night. "Mommy, Daddy says bad people always get caught," he'd whispered, eyes wide. Is that true? Back then, I'd kissed his forehead and said, eventually. Now I knew eventually sometimes needed help. I also knew something else. If I ran, the Caldwells would keep building, keep hurting people, keep using my kids as little anchors in their empire. And somewhere in this mess, my father deserved more than a death certificate that said accident. So I made a choice. I spent the rest of that day packing evidence. I went through every folder, every taped box, every hidden compartment in that cabin. Raymond had left everything labeled, organized, triple documented, like he knew one day someone would need to prove this to people who didn't want to believe it. Financial statements, insurance adjustments, photos, recordings, handwritten logs of meetings and overheard conversations. By the time I finished, my duffel bag was full of decades of crime and cowardice. When I locked the cabin door behind me, the air outside bit at my cheeks. The sky was washing from gray to pink, the forest holding its breath. I stood for a moment, looking back at the cabin silhouetted against the snow. "You didn't get to finish this," I whispered. "But I will." The drive back toward civilization felt different. The roads were the same, the snow, the dark pines. But now I wasn't driving away from something. I was driving toward something, toward a confrontation, toward a version of myself that didn't just survive what had been done to me, but did something about it. As soon as my phone buzzed back to life with a signal bar, I pulled into a gas station and sat there, engine idling, staring at the steering wheel. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't just fear. It was adrenaline. I opened the browser and typed FBI Seattle Field Office. When I got the number, I dialed before I could talk myself out of it. "FBI," a voice answered. "My name is Emily Hartman," I said, surprised at how steady I sounded. "I have evidence of a 30-year cover-up, corporate fraud, and a murder made to look like an accident. And I'm ready to talk." They didn't roll out the red carpet. It's not a movie. At first, they were polite but skeptical. I met with an agent named Patricia Knowles, a woman in her 50s with sharp gray eyes, and an expression that made it clear she'd heard every kind of wild story you could imagine. In the small interview room, under fluorescent lights, she asked me to start from the beginning. I did. I told her about Riverbend, the affair, the storage unit, the briefcase, the cabin, the wall of evidence. I told her about the tape at Riverside Motel, about K.H. Lowe and Richard Caldwell's voices, planning my erasure like it was business strategy. Her expression didn't change much. Not until I slid the USB drive and a stack of documents across the table. "Everything S backed up," I said. "There's more, but this will get you started." She took them like they were just objects. But when she came back the next day for a follow-up, her tone was different. "Emily," she said over the phone, voice low, "this is bigger than we thought. You need to stay quiet for now. Don't confront them. Don't hint at what you know. We're opening an investigation." So I stayed quiet, while the FBI subpoenaed old insurance records and traced money trails through shell companies and offshore accounts. I checked into a cheap motel off Highway 2 and tried to become invisible. Days bled into nights of microwave dinners and dreams that felt too much like memories. Every week, Agent Knowles called with short updates. "We've confirmed the policy changes before your father's death. We've linked payments from Caldwell accounts to local officials. We've located additional recordings from your uncle." Each update was a small vindication, proof that I wasn't crazy, that my pain had a shape and a cause and names attached. Meanwhile, I still had to live. I picked up odd jobs under the table. I stayed off social media. I called my kids when I was allowed, careful not to let my voice shake. I told them I loved them, that I was working on things, that I was okay. I didn't tell them I was helping dismantle the foundation of everything they thought their life was built on. Sometimes I'd lie awake at 3 a.m. staring at the motel ceiling, asking myself if this was worth it. If poking a giant like the Caldwells would end up getting me crushed again. Then I'd remember Ethan's text, "You'll die poor and alone." I'd remember K.H. Lowe's voice on that tape. "She trusts me completely. Ethan's falling for me already." I'd remember my father's smile in that photo, his hand in Richard's. And I'd think, if I walk away now, I'm letting them write the ending. I hadn't crawled out of a storage unit and driven through half the country to let the worst people I'd ever known have the last word. So I waited. I cooperated. I kept breathing. Then, one morning, my phone buzzed, and Agent Knowles' voice sounded different. "It's happening," she said. "Stay where you are. Turn on the news." I grabbed the remote with hands that already knew something big was about to break. The motel TV flickered to life on a news channel, and there he was, Ethan, my ex-husband, walking out of a country club in handcuffs, flanked by federal agents. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted his name. Behind him, looking pale and furious, was Richard Caldwell, jaw tight, hand shielding his face. Next to them, trying to hide under a jacket and failing, was K.H. Lowe. My sister. Her wrists were cuffed, mascara tracking down her cheeks as agents guided her toward a waiting black SUV. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "FBI RAIDS Caldwell Industries in $80 M fraud and murder cover-up probe." My legs gave out. I slid down the side of the bed to the stained motel carpet and laughed and cried at the same time. It didn't feel real. It felt like watching actors play characters that coincidentally had my family's faces. For years, they'd taken everything from me: my father, my marriage, my job, my kids, my home. They de-left me in a storage unit. Sure, I'd disappear quietly while they enjoyed their success built on blood and lies. And now they were the ones being dragged into the light. That was just the beginning. A few weeks later, I was subpoenaed to testify. The trial was held in federal court in Seattle, kind of courthouse that feels designed to remind you how small you are. The day I walked in, reporters clustered outside, their breath puffing in the cold, cameras ready to catch anything dramatic. To them, it was a story. To me, it was my entire life under harsh fluorescent lights. Inside the courtroom, Ethan sat at the defense table in an expensive suit that suddenly looked too big for him. He was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was finally seeing him without the halo I'd given him. His eyes met mine for a flicker of a second, then darted away. K.H. Lowe sat beside him, in a simple blouse, hair pulled back, hands trembling in her lap. Richard's chair was empty by then. He'd suffered a stroke awaiting trial and would never sit in that room. When the prosecutor called my name, my legs felt like wood. "Please state your name for the record." "Emily Hartman." "And how are you connected to the defendants?" "They're my family," I said quietly. Then, after a beat, or they were, I told the jury everything. I walked them through the life that looked perfect from the outside. The house, the job, the kids. I told them about the anonymous email, the photo in the parking lot, the feeling of my world collapsing in my kitchen. I told them about the job termination, the grocery store, the storage unit, the briefcase with my name on it. I told them about Timberwolf Trail, the cabin, the wall of evidence, the tape with K.H. Lowe's voice, plotting with Richard. The courtroom was so quiet at times that I could hear pens scratching. When the tape from the Riverside Motel played, K.H. Lowe's voice saying, "She trusts me completely." "Ethan's falling for me already," a murmur rippled through the room. I saw one juror press their lips together, eyes flashing with disgust. Ethan's lawyer tried to tear me down. "Miss Hartman," he said at one point, voice dripping with false sympathy, "you lived in a storage unit, correct?" "Yes," I answered. "Would you agree that someone in that situation might be under stress? Perhaps not in the clearest state of mind. I could have rolled over, let the humiliation wash me away. Instead, something steelier rose up. Yes," I said, "I was under stress because your client and his family took everything from me. That didn't make me hallucinate a cabin full of documents or those recordings. It made me desperate enough to follow the truth all the way to the end. And that's why we're all here." The jury's faces hardened. The verdict didn't come fast. 4 days of deliberation felt like 4 years. When we finally filed back into the courtroom, my heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out before they finished reading. On the charge of fraud and conspiracy, guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. On the charge of aiding and abetting cover-up for Ethan, 18 years. For K.H. Lowe, 12 years. Richard never made it to sentencing. He died in custody. No one cheered. This wasn't a movie. The judge's gavel came down with a final crack, and the air shifted like the room itself exhaled. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there with my hands folded, feeling something inside me loosen. Something I'd been holding so tightly for so long I didn't even know it had a name. Afterward, K.H. Lowe asked to see me. Against my better judgment, part of me, the part that still remembered sharing a bedroom and secrets with her, said yes. We sat on opposite sides of a thick pane of glass in a small holding room. She looked younger without makeup, hair tied back, orange jumpsuit replacing her usual office chic clothes. Her eyes were hollow. "You were never supposed to find out," she whispered into the phone. "You always said I was too naive," I replied, my voice calm. "Guess I finally learned." Tears spilled down her cheeks. Ethan, he made promises. He said we'd be rich. He said he loved me. He said the same to me once, I said. He was lying to both of us. The difference is you chose to help him. She broke then. Sobs shook her shoulders. I know, and that's what makes it worse. For a second, I almost reached out, like muscle memory. Then I remembered the photo of her laughing with Richard, the way she'd looked at me in the office that day, with that small, pitying smile. You could have told me, I said softly. At any point, you could have warned me. You were my sister. I know, she repeated. I'm sorry. The words floated between us, too late and too light to hold up against what she'd done. When I walked out of that room, the air outside the courthouse felt different. The sky was pale gray, snow drifting down in lazy flakes, just like the day I found the cabin. I tilted my face up and let the cold sting my skin. For the first time in years, I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding in a storage unit or a motel. Justice had finally come not as revenge, but as something cleaner. Truth. 6 months after the verdict, I woke up to birds outside my window instead of trucks rumbling past metal doors. I'd bought a modest farmhouse outside Portland. White shutters, a porch with peeling paint that I planned to fix, a yard overrun with wild daisies. It wasn't some palatial mansion, even though I could have afforded one after the FBI finished untangling Uncle Raymond's estate and wiring me the rest: land, mineral rights, accounts. The full value of everything my father had died over. $80 million. That number used to sound like fantasy. Now, it just felt like responsibility. I didn't go on a shopping spree. I didn't buy a yacht or 10 sports cars. I bought freedom. I paid off debts, set up a trust for Liam and Sophie, and founded the Hartman Hope Fund in Raymond's name, a small foundation to help women rebuild after betrayal, abuse, or financial ruin. Every application I read, every story that passed across my desk, reminded me of that cold night in Unit 32B when I thought my life was over. Liam and Sophie visit every weekend now. The first time they came to the farmhouse, they stood on the porch like they weren't sure if they were allowed to step over the threshold. So much had been said to them about me, about what happened, about who was better for them. I knelt down, my throat tight, and said, "You can always come home to me, no matter what anyone told you." Sophie moved first. She threw herself at me with the same intensity she used to hug her stuffed bunny, and I almost fell backward. Liam hesitated, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes flicking between us. Then he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around both of us. That hug felt like the final piece sliding into place. We spent that afternoon baking cookies that were mostly burnt and watching old cartoons. Sophie fell asleep with her head in my lap. At one point, Liam looked up from his phone, studied me for a second, and said quietly, "Mom, I'm proud of you." It took everything in me not to break down. Sometimes, when I drive into town for groceries, I pass by a storage facility that looks a lot like the one I used to live in. Rows of little doors, each with its own lock and its own story. I still pay the $89 a month for Unit 32B back in Oregon, even though it's empty now. People tell me I'm wasting money. Maybe I am. To me, that unit isn't just a metal box. It's a scar, a reminder of the lowest point in my life, and the strange, impossible way the universe tossed me a lifeline in the form of a dusty briefcase with my name on it. Uncle Raymond was right. The truth did cost me peace before it set me free. It ripped apart what was left of my illusions. It forced me into courtrooms and cabins and lonely motel rooms. But in the end, it gave me something no betrayal can steal: clarity. Now, when people ask about my story, I don't just talk about the money or the trial. I tell them this: I lost a husband, a sister, and almost my mind. But I gained a sense of who I am when everything else is gone. I gained 2 kids who know their mother never stopped fighting for them, even when she was sleeping in a storage unit. I gained the freedom to build a life that isn't built on pretending everything is fine when it's not. My name is Emily Hartman. I was left for dead emotionally, financially, legally, by the people I loved most. I didn't rise to burn their world down for the sake of it. I rose to bring the truth into the light and rebuild mine. Now, I sit on my own porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise spill gold across fields I actually own, and I whisper the words Raymond left me. Truth isn't easy, but it's freedom. And freedom is worth every scar. If you were in my place, if your husband and your own sister took everything from you, and you found a way to expose the truth at the risk of your safety, would you have taken the money and vanished, or done what I did? Would you have confronted them in court, or would you have tried to forgive quietly and move on? Have you ever had family betray you so deeply that you had to choose between peace and justice? Tell me what you would have done. And if you have your own letter to karma, share it. Your story might be the next one we tell on Karma's letterbox.